Welcome. My name is Janine Mason. I'm the founder and executive director of the Fieldstone Leadership Network San Diego, and it's my privilege to welcome you to our FORTIFY webinar today on crafting your credentials. I'm excited that we're able to provide this learning opportunity today in partnership with the Nonprofit Institute at the University of San Diego. We are both organizations that are committed to supporting the leadership of our nonprofit sector. And FORTIFY was crafted in response to the feedback that both of our organizations was receiving from the leaders that are involved in our programs on the things that they needed to help navigate during COVID-19. So it was a pure joy to be able to put this together as an offering of support from both Fieldstone and the Nonprofit Institute at the University of San Diego, and a joy to work with the folks over at USD as well. You'll hear a little bit more about the feedback that we've been getting through the survey that USD has been administering a little bit later from my colleague, Laura Dietrich. To help you to make the very most of this time together, I want to go over a couple housekeeping things. And Mary, if you can. Great, perfect. If you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to email Mary. Her email address is there on the screen, or you can use the chat box and let her know if you're having some challenges or you need some other support. Everyone on the webinar is muted today. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And if you have resources that you would like to share with our community today, please go ahead and put those in the chat, and then we'll collect all of those and share them with you after the webinar has been completed. We will stay online today if needed for about 10 minutes. We want to make sure that all of you who are with us today have an opportunity to have your questions answered. So if we need some additional time, we'll stay on for about 10 minutes after 1 o'clock today to make sure that we meet your needs. We are recording this webinar, and we will have that recording along with the resources on the website for both Fieldstone and the Nonprofit Institute, and that will be available as early as sometime this afternoon. Next slide, Mary. Again, we will stay for after hours for about 10 minutes if we need it, so that you have an opportunity to engage with Trevor and have all of your questions answered. And it's now my privilege to introduce to you to Dr. Laura Dietrich. I know that many of you know Laura. She serves as the Associate Director of the Nonprofit Institute, and I also am blessed to call her my friend. So Laura, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Great, and somebody sounds like they're using an old-fashioned dial-up there. Thank you, Janine, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It is, you know, with the event of a worldwide pandemic come challenges and opportunities. Sometimes, you know, this has been an interesting opportunity for us to really reach deeply to the nonprofit sector, to study what's going on in real time. We've released 2 of the nation's first studies on nonprofit leader needs and surveys that have been replicated in several states around the country. We have a study coming out in the Chronicle of Philanthropy next week on individuals and giving. So I just want to give you guys a sense that we actually listen when you respond to those surveys, and we use the data really in a meaningful way to advocate, to talk loudly about what nonprofit leaders tell us they need, and also to craft programming like this program to meet your needs. So, you know, in our first round of surveys, actually the first 2, nonprofit leaders have basically told us, hey, these are the things we really need help with right now. And, you know, FORTIFY, if you look at many of our offerings, was designed to meet many of these needs. So we're doing 2 webinars a week, and on the Tuesday webinar, we're doing more technical stuff, the fundraising, the finance, and all of that. And on the Friday webinars, we're doing investments in yourself. So please keep joining us, or look at our backdated webinars, because they're for you and your organizations. So here comes the challenge. And then I know my good colleague who's going to present today and friend will talk about the opportunity. But the challenge really is, as I don't need to tell you, the nonprofit workforce, for the first time since I've studied it, which goes back a long time, since before the Great Recession, for the first time ever, we're seeing declines in employment in the nonprofit workforce. And this is a really challenging issue that I'm trying to raise a lot of awareness about, because, nonprofit employment has grown year over year over year, regardless of the economy. And that is not the case now. With our last survey showed that 50% of organizations had furloughed, laid off, reduced hours, etc., with some subsectors being particularly hard hit, but even essential organizations laying off. So we have a really talented workforce that we've worked so long and hard, all of us, to develop and nurture, and we're going to be expected to deliver in any kind of recovery. So we're really focusing on this hollowing out of the workforce, and how do we retain those great talents as we build out of this pandemic to whatever this new normal is supposedly going to be. So with that, we want you to invest in yourselves, whether you're sidelined, thinking about a career change. Some people are just reevaluating their goals in general in light of this pandemic. We thought it'd be great to bring somebody on the line to talk to you who's an expert in all things nonprofit career related, and in moving people along in their careers. So today we're joined by Trevor Blair, and Trevor is the CEO of Blair Search Partners, and they focus primarily on nonprofits. And I'm going to turn this over now to Trevor, and he will introduce himself further and take you through some really cool tips of the trade. Trevor and I just finished doing a search together, so I've seen how he works, and I know he's the right person to do this call with you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Laura. Very much appreciated. And I will share my screen here. Okay. Sorry, it's a little slow here today. Okay, there we go. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Janine and Laura and Mary, for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. And let me, before I even get into the deck, let me share with you what we are seeing in terms of hiring and what's happening with career prospects in the nonprofit sector here in San Diego, because it is quite dire, and I know everyone has been hearing about the doom and gloom. But I also want to provide some reason for optimism as well. And I can tell you that despite the fact that we hear more about layoffs and furloughs right now, hiring is still happening. There are positions that are getting filled every day. We have 2 searches that just launched within the last 2 weeks. We have another 2 that are launching in the following weeks. So while the volume is certainly down, we typically have between 10 and 15 searches going at any one time. So obviously that's way down. But I share those numbers with you as an example that hiring is still happening. So now is the best possible time to really get out there, double down on your efforts in terms of your professional development, utilizing all the resources that Laura mentioned, all the resources that Fieldstone has available. Invest in yourself during this time. And also, if you are in transition, or you are furloughed, or you are concerned about your role, or if maybe just the current situation has given you reason to take a step back and look at your career and what your next move should be, now is the ideal time to start working on that. Because first and foremost, your competition is not. Most people have the mindset that they don't want to bother anybody right now, and it's a doom and gloom time, and they feel uncomfortable reaching out and networking. So they are kind of mentally checking out right now and thinking that they'll resume their job search in the fall when things start to pick up a little bit. That is absolutely not what you want to do. Firstly, we're over the shock period of this. This has kind of become, sadly, the new normal for everyone. And I think people are sort of accepting it and trying to make do and move forward as best they can, which means it is okay to continue networking and reaching out. The other thing to keep in mind is that the people that you're trying to reach out to and network with are a captive audience. They're on lockdown as well. They're not in staff meetings. They're not at board meetings. They're not at galas, fundraisers, et cetera, et cetera. So all the influencers that you probably are trying to get in front of are, during the lockdown period, much more accessible to you and much more likely to take that call, to respond to your email. So this is the time to double down on your career transition or on your professional development. It's really a unique time, and really, if we think about it, an opportunity to sort of accelerate your efforts during this time. So that's the backdrop. Again, yes, it is challenging, but hiring is still going on out there. So this is a chance for you to get ahead of your competition and to really stand out. We are going to talk primarily about the resume, but we will save some time for LinkedIn as well. And I'll talk about how those two really feed together. So let me back up. Let me talk about a little bit about our firm and who we are to provide some context for the rest of the presentation. We are a retained search and recruiting firm based here in San Diego. We work exclusively with nonprofit and public sector organizations at all levels. I'd say 2/3 of our work is at the director, VP, and C level, but we also fill a lot of staff and support positions as well. We manage about 40 or so engagements a year here in San Diego in a typical year. Who knows what the rest of 2020 will look like? It'll probably slow down a little bit, but nevertheless, we're filling a lot of roles at a lot of different levels for a lot of different organizations. For our largest client would be the San Diego Housing Commission at an annual budget of $400 million, all the way down to small startup nonprofits that just got their 501c3 status. So there are opportunities at organizations of all sizes, and it just requires doubling down and really putting yourself out there. A little bit more about our work and the strategies that I'm going to be sharing with you. We also provide a lot of individual career transition coaching. So that's working with people who are in between roles, people who are trying to get ahead in their current organization, or folks who kind of feel like they've hit the glass ceiling. So a lot of the content we're going to talk about today is what we share with our clients in our coaching practice, and we're going to cram it all into the next hour or so as best we can. We also see a lot of resumes every year. So year to date, we've managed 43 search engagements in San Diego. We like to build really big candidate pools of 400 plus, even up to 1,300 candidates per search. So that's a lot of resumes. So we've got a lot of data points to draw on in terms of what works with the resume and the LinkedIn profile and what doesn't work. And how can you write a resume that is effective for your target audience? Because you really need to be reaching out to the hiring manager. And when I say hiring manager, I mean whoever it is that's making the decision if you move forward or not in the process. So in some instances, it is the CEO. In some instances, it's an HR director. In some instances, it might be chief program officer, whoever it might be. But the person who is responsible for deciding, does this person get an interview, and then does this person move forward in our process? So that's what I mean by hiring manager. It doesn't necessarily mean HR. So that's a little bit about where we're going here today. Just to recap real briefly, here's our very quick and brief agenda. We're going to keep it simple, clean, high level. We can dig into questions that you may have along the way as we get going. I'll take a couple pauses to address your questions, and I'm happy to stay on after the call to chat further. We're going to start by talking about the mindset of the hiring manager and helping you get inside the brain of the people who are making the decisions of if and when you move forward in the hiring process, and understanding your audience and who are you writing for and what are they looking for? What is the hiring manager thinking as they are reading your resume? That's who you want to be writing to. We're going to talk about their mindset and what factors determine whether the resume is passed forward or not to the next step. And then we'll talk about what the resume is, and equally as important, what it is not. Some common misconceptions. So a lot of content. This is typically a 2+ hour seminar. We're going to try and cram it down here again, like I said, into the next. We got about 45 minutes here. So I'm going to talk pretty fast, but we'll see how much we can get in. Okay. What I'm about to share next applies to nonprofit organizations, public sector organizations, corporate organizations. At the end of the day, hiring people is expensive. Hiring people is risky. And the person who is looking at your resume, what they're thinking, whether they know this or not, on the most fundamental level is very basic and straightforward. When you boil the process down, there's really only three. Usually I say three. Four is the make me look good part. But the basic three things they're thinking about when they're looking through your resume in the back of their mind is, how is this person going to generate revenue for our organization? How are they going to save our organization money? I.e., how are they going to help us operate better with them on board than if we did not hire them? And how are they going to fit in? And when I say fit with my tribe, I mean, how are they going to fit with our staff? How are they going to fit with our donor base? How are they going to fit with our community of stakeholders that are important to our work? So that cultural alignment piece. So it's make this organization money, save this organization money, and cultural alignment are really the top three things, and really the three most core basic things that the hiring decision really comes down to. And the fourth, it's a little bit more of a narcissistic way to look at it. But the other thing is, every person who touches your resume and reads it and decides, does this candidate move forward or not? They are thinking, whether they know it or not, if I recommend this person for an interview, how does that reflect back on me as the person who screened that resume? So at every stage of the process, whether it starts with HR and then it goes to the, say the chief program officer, and then from there you've got to go through an interview with the CEO, and the last stage, each one of those people is thinking, how is this candidate going to make me look good? Because when I recommend them for an interview, I'm putting a little tiny piece of myself on the line as well. If they bomb that interview and turn out to be a terrible fit for our organization, that's going to reflect poorly on me as well. So these things, like I said, whether it's a for-profit, not-for-profit, or public sector organization, these four things are really what the hiring manager is thinking about. So with the resume, when you're deciding, should it go on the resume or not? Is it relevant or not? If it doesn't speak to one of these, really the top three, these top three factors, then you can probably afford to leave it off, because these are the three most basic fundamental value drivers that affect the hiring decision. So let's talk about what the resume is. It is the story of your professional evolution, but before that, it's a sales and marketing document. It is getting your foot in the door with an organization. Now, the other thing is, that's really its main role. The resume's job, if you will, once it gets you that first interview, its primary function is done. At that point, once you've got that first interview, it is all up to you and your communication skills and how you show up physically, psychologically. It's all in the personal connection in the interviews from that point forward. The resume has done most of its job. However, that document will continue to follow you through every stage of the process, but it is a sales and marketing document to market you into the organization. It is not a laundry list of everywhere you've been and everywhere you've worked and all of the responsibilities that you've had. It is a tool to get your foot in the door. The other thing is that it is the story of how you have evolved professionally throughout your career. It is not, and we'll talk about this on the next slide, it is not a regurgitation of every job description that you've ever had. You are telling your personal story as a professional, again, how you have evolved chronologically through every stage of your career. And it needs to be tight, coherent, and there needs to be some consistency in themes so that when the person picks up the resume, by the time they get through the first third of it, they have a pretty good idea where you might fit. Is this a fundraiser? Is this a finance person? Is this an HR person? So the resume really kind of needs to tell a cohesive story, and it needs to reflect sort of a journey, if you will, that the reader can understand of where you started and where you are going in your career. It is also, and this is really important, we're going to talk about this a couple more times today, but it is not a regurgitation of your job descriptions. It is the story of your evolution told through your accomplishments. And we're going to talk about the role and importance of data a lot here today. But your resume is not a list of, I held this responsibility and this responsibility and this responsibility. It's a list of your accomplishments and achievements in each role that you've held, i.e., how did you move the needle and drive value for that organization while you were in that position? Again, it comes down to economics. Hiring people is risky and expensive. The hiring manager wants to see that you will generate or save, or ideally both, more revenue for their organization should they hire you than the cost and risk of employing you. And so that's where you really want to quantify your achievements and the value that you have provided for each of your organizations in each position that you have had. So that's dollar signs, percentage symbols, as many numbers as you can come up with. And we'll talk about how you quantify that later. Lastly, the resume is a living document. This is not something that you write once and then you're done. You don't touch it for 3 years. It is something that stays with you through every stage of your career, whether you're moving between jobs or not. The resume is the kind of thing that you want to have it ready and current because you never know when you're going to need it. You will often be asked for a resume if you are applying to serve on a commission or if you are asked to step onto a board. And so for that reason, it's always good to have your professional bio and your resume up to date so that you can turn that around really quickly. You don't want to have to say, give me a couple of weeks, I need to refresh this, because you may miss whatever opportunity that is. The other thing is it's a lot easier to update your resume in small bits as you go along through your career rather than only doing it every 5 years or so, because all the data is going to be at your fingertips. You're going to be able to tell a much better story. It's much harder to think back, gosh, and when that role 5 years ago, what were my signature achievements and how did I drive impact? So maybe touch it up once a month or touch it up once a quarter. It's a lot easier than going back and only doing a resume refresh once you actually are trying to move positions. So with that said, before we get on to the next slide, Janine, are there any questions that you'd like me to address real quick?
Yes, we have two, Trevor.
Okay.
The first one talks about your first slide. Could number 3, which was the fitting in piece, the tribe piece, be perhaps the most important consideration in a small organization, or are they all equally important?
That is a great question, and thank you to whoever asked it, because that is the heart of the hiring process. It is likability. So the resume gets your foot in the door. The resume tells the organization, tells the reader on paper, this person can do this job. And here's the value that they're going to deliver for our organization, because I can see quite clearly they have delivered significant value for each of their previous organizations. Again, as evidenced by all the facts and figures that you can have on your resume. Once you get into that first meeting, and again, the resume's job is to get you that first meeting or even get you that first call, right? At that point, the name of the game is likability. And this applies equally to large organizations as small organizations, but one could argue even more so in smaller organizations, because people want to work with people that are obviously highly competent, but we want to work with people that make us feel good, that we are excited to come in and go to work with. because as we all know, we spend a lot more of our time on this planet at work with our work colleagues than we ever get to do with our spouses and families and whatnot, right? So, God help you if you don't love the people that you're working with. And so likability is super, super important. And again, the hiring manager may or may not be, super self-aware or into emotional intelligence, but whether they know it or not, the biggest factor in their mind after they have met you and determined, yes, this person has the competencies, it's likability. And do I feel a connection with this person? Do I feel, when I walk out of the room after having met with them, do I feel uplifted and even better than when I walked in? If so, then you're probably going to get moved on. Back to large versus small organizations. In a small organization, this is even more important because every hire has a lot more risk to it. If you only have a team of 4 and you hire one bad apple, that could wreck the entire organization. If you have a team of 50 and you hire one bad apple, it might make some people uncomfortable, but it's not going to be the end of the world. So for smaller organizations, they are even more focused on the cultural alignment, the fit, and the likability. And so really be aware of what kind of energy am I bringing into every conversation, every meeting, every phone call. Am I coming across as someone who is uplifting and enthusiastic and positive? Or is my delivery very flat and I have no excitement in my voice and I kind of sound like a robot, right? I mean, I know which person I'd want to go to work with every day. So that's a little bit about likability. I really cannot overemphasize how important overall likability is in the ultimate hiring decision. Good question. Thank you.
So Trevor, can you expand on that a little bit and maybe make the connection for us about the likability piece to the alignment or connection to an organization's mission? Is that part of this step of making sure the person fits in with the tribe?
It is, and this is where it gets a little bit tougher, right? Because facts and figures and skills and competencies, those are pretty cut and dry and they're easy enough to quantify and you can put those on paper. Communicating fit, likability, mission alignment, that's where we kind of get to the squishy stuff. And so how do you show that on paper? It's easy enough once you actually are in the interview, right? Because you can project your enthusiasm and your passion, and you can talk about your previous work, maybe serving similar populations. So it's easier to do in person. But again, we're talking about the resume. How do we communicate that, in a pretty straightforward, simple document? And it's in the phrasing and language that you use. And so there are subtle tweaks you can make so that the reader reads your document and says, oh, they're kind of speaking my language. I can relate to this. They seem to get us. And on, a really basic example would be in fundraising. If you are applying to an academic institution, you would use the term advancement versus fundraising, or maybe even over development. Advancement is just the more common term in academia. In another organization, they might use philanthropy instead of fundraising. So it's just going through your resume and making those small adjustments. Everywhere you've written fundraising, you put in philanthropy or development, if that's the term that they use. So looking at their literature, looking at their website, if you're able to talk to people who currently work there or have worked there, pay close attention to the terms that they use to describe the work and the terms that they use to describe the population that they serve and the organization's mission. And make sure the language that you are using in the resume and then ultimately in your interviews that is similar, that you're using the same terms and speaking to the same things. And that is how you start to create that tribal fit, if you will, within the mind of the person that you're talking to. Good question.
Great. So we have another question that seems to be a great timely question in terms of cover letters, because that's another way to communicate. And the person who's asked the question really has captured sometimes how I feel, is that sometimes they don't feel like they matter as much or have a place in an electronic process. Yep. Sometimes you're just submitting a resume. So can you talk about how important cover letters are, and if they're not requested or required in an application, is it a good thing still to add those, or follow the directions specifically?
So I'm smiling and laughing here, Janine, because if I could end the practice of cover letters tomorrow, I would. I hate cover letters.
Okay.
Straight up, I hate them. They're a waste of your time as a candidate, and they're a waste of my time as a recruiter. So if you go back to the numbers that I shared, 400 to 1,300 candidates per search, and we're running 10, early this year, we're up to 17 searches at a time. If we have 17 searches at, even on the low end, 400 candidates per search, plus every candidate then submits a cover letter, we've now doubled the number of documents that we have to read, process, store, et cetera, et cetera. The cover letter is like a fax machine or the carrier pigeon, right? I mean, it's a practice that started ages ago that just hasn't died yet, and some folks just won't let it go. Old school recruiters still ask for a cover letter. I say it's a waste of your time and a waste of our time because let's face it, we all know it's a form letter, it's a template. You're taking the same document that you've sent to 10 different organizations and trying to customize it so it makes it sound like it's fresh and original. We know that, you know that. So our approach is, we want to make the process as easy for the candidate as well because you're investing a lot of time in this too. So the cover letter is totally redundant. Again, the cover letter was born, if you will, back in the day when you mailed a hard copy resume because it was literally a letter that covered the resume when you folded it all together, dropped it in the envelope, so that when the person opened it, the letter told the reader, oh, this is why I'm receiving this document, this is who they are, this is what they're applying for. Well, either the job board that you're applying through already does that for you because it sends the hiring manager only resumes in a folder only for that job, or the email that you write is going to do that, right? So having an email and then a cover letter and then a resume, it's really hard to write a cover letter and then write a resume, but not have the resume sound redundant to the cover letter. We know that's a pain for candidates as well. So a good, well-written email is really all you need. And what they're really looking for in the cover letter is communication skills. Is this person a good writer? You can show that in your email, right? So a nice, well-written email, honest, direct, brief, communicating, why are you reaching out? What are you hoping for in terms of next steps? Attaching your resume, that's all it needs to do. That tells us that, okay, this person has good communication skills. Here's what they're interested in. Here's why they're reaching out or how they were connected to us. Now I'm going to open the resume. Most of the time, in fact, I'll tell you exactly what happens. When an email comes in, we read the email. If it's a well-written email, we open the resume. If the resume looks good and is relevant to the position that we're recruiting for, we may or may not even read the cover letter, right? There's no additional value that cover letter is going to add beyond that. So again, requesting cover letters is very old school. I wish that practice would go away. I feel really bad for candidates because I know what a pain it is and how much of a time suck it is for you. But it is what it is. That said, if the application process calls for it, and if it states it on the website anywhere, for instance, academic institutions are notorious for requesting cover letters. If it requests a cover letter, absolutely write a cover letter because you want to show that you are following instructions, that you have attention to detail, all that sort of stuff. But please know that our firm will never, ever request a cover letter from you. And I really wish that practice would go away, again, because email serves that purpose. So thanks for indulging me there. Clearly you can tell I feel passionate about getting rid of cover letters. Let's move on.
Okay, we have two other questions, but they're about, they're technical questions about the length of a resume and the format of a resume. And so I was going to hold those, unless you want to answer them now, in this anticipation that you may be moving to those specifics in your presentation.
Yes, we are moving to that, but if I don't address exactly your questions around length and format, happy to come back to it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so let's talk very briefly about what the cover letter is not. We mentioned the cover letter, the resume. What the resume is not. It is not going to get you the job, but it is going to get your foot in the door. So it plays an incredibly important first step in the process, which is why you always got to start with a good resume. It is not a copy-paste job from all of your prior job descriptions. And that is usually what we see with most resumes. Most candidates go back, they get copies of all their old job descriptions, or they make some bullets about what their job descriptions entailed. And they copy and paste that into their resume. They put their company name, their title, dates of employment, and send it off. And that is really doing yourself a disservice, because when you just copy and paste a job description into a resume, right, all it is a laundry list of duties and responsibilities. It does not actually give the reader any indication as to how well you completed those duties or responsibilities. It just says what you were supposed to do, not how well you did it. And it also does nothing to quantify the impact that you delivered for that organization while you were in that position. So there's no meat to it. There's no weight to it. It's just you saying what you did. That does not tell the organization at all whether or not you are going to be able to deliver for them. It's also not unique to you, right? Because if you just copy and paste all your job descriptions into your resume, every candidate that had the job before you and every candidate that had your job after you can copy and paste the exact same thing. And all their resumes are going to look exactly like yours. There's nothing customized to you and your impact about that. Again, the resume is the story of you as you have evolved as a professional through your career, through the lens of the impact that you have delivered at every organization. How did you move the needle in every position you had? That's what your bullet points are going to focus on. Along with the cover letter, in terms of an outdated hiring practice, is the limit on resumes. It used to be that recruiters would tell you, 1 to 2 pages max on a resume, keep it brief. I got a lot of resumes to read and, save my time. I think that's really outdated advice. First reason being that your resume, for the most part, will be in electronic format the entire time through the process. Only at the very end, when you're sitting down with someone deeper into the hiring process, might your resume actually be printed in hard copy. So if it's being forwarded in soft copy through every stage of the process and no one has to print it, what do they care if it's 2 pages, 4 pages, 5 pages, right? They don't have to print it. You don't have to mail it, so it's not like you got to worry about extra postage. The other thing is, if the resume is compelling and is telling a good story and you've got a lot of impact to share, the reader's going to want to keep going beyond 1, 2 pages, maybe even 3 or 4. So if you are an experienced executive, I would expect your resume by this point in time would reach at least 3 or 4 pages. If you've been in the workforce for 20 plus years and you've been doing good work, there's no way you could take all of your impact in every position you've had and distill it down into just 1 or 2 pages with any real meaningful level of detail. If you've been, even in the workforce 10 years and you're trying to write a 1-page resume, by the time you get through your contact information and a key skill summary at the top, you've got about like that much room to actually fit work experience in there. There's no way you're going to be able to really detail your signature accomplishments and where you drove value. So a 3-page resume is fine. If you've been in the workforce longer, a 4-page resume is fine. We have never dinged a candidate because their resume was 4 pages versus 3 pages. Again, as long as it's concise, as long as you've got data, as long as there's a compelling story that you're telling, don't get hung up on the length, because it is really, really hard to try and tell that story in a meaningful amount of detail in just 1 or 2 pages. The next one here, the resume is meant to be clean and simple. You want to create a document that is user-friendly, right? Remember the thousands and thousands of numbers, and we're a boutique search firm, right? So you can imagine if it's a huge HR department or one of the big global generalist search firms, how many millions of resumes they're going through each year. So you want to write something that's very user-friendly to the reader on the other end. And user-friendly means keeping the format clean and simple. And that means no graphics, no pictures, no tables, no columns. Marketing people in particular have a tough time with this because they want to show how creative and innovative they are and make a document that's really, really pretty. What you really want to create is a document that's effective. And so you want something that speaks directly to the value you bring to an organization, not this really cool, funky format that you can put together. The other thing is, if you are going through an online process, weird formatting may get your resume hung up in the process. The software may not be able to pull out all of the lines and drop them in the right template on the user's back end. So keep the resume in chronological format. Keep it simple, no graphics, pictures, photos, or anything, just text. You want to use a clean layout with enough white space, but you want to use small paragraphs and bullet points, and we'll talk about that next. But again, the resume needs to be clean, simple, and user-friendly. Okay, I'm going to move fast here through additional recommendations. We talked about data. I'm going to talk about it again. You can't just tell people on your resume how good you are. You need to back that up with numbers, and anything can be quantified. You may have to kind of think about it a little harder and work on it, but when you really pull back and look at your role, whether you are in, maybe you're not a fundraiser, but you're in donor stewardship, so you don't have direct control over new revenue, or you might be in programs and not necessarily in finance, so you don't necessarily have access to financial data. Whatever it is, if you really think about your position at a fundamental level, there is still ample opportunity to quantify the value you have brought to that organization and how you have helped, again, drive revenue, save revenue, and your cultural fit. And think about things like efficiency gains, productivity gains. If you oversee staff, think about were you able to increase retention because your people stayed longer because you're providing good coaching and mentoring, and so they were more engaged. You can use numbers from employee engagement surveys for the people who are reporting to you. If you're in fundraising, it's not just about the absolute number of dollars brought in. It's about the size of your donor portfolio. Did you grow that portfolio? Did you increase donor retention year on year? Did you increase not just the size of major gifts, but how about just the number of gifts in general? So there's a lot of different stories that can be told numerically beyond just the dollars. So really think hard about your role and think about how you were able to drive change and deliver value, and how can you put a number on that? Because with a number, what you're telling the reader is, hey, I'm not just telling you I'm good, I'm showing you I'm good because I've got all the data to back it up. Another practice that we see a lot of candidates neglecting is intro paragraphs. So in terms of format, to the question earlier, you want to have your contact info, a brief summary of your skills and the positions that you're targeting. And then from there, it goes organization name, then a 2 or 3 line brief paragraph talking about who that organization is, what they do, and why they matter. Then your position title, and then bullet points about your accomplishments while you were in that role. That little intro paragraph is important because it provides context for the reader about what your bullet points are referring to, right? If I have no idea who this organization is or what they do, the bullet points aren't going to have that much meaning for me. So you want to provide that background context, but the other thing is you want to talk up the organization and why they matter and why they're a leader in that field, because by talking up the organization, you get to brag about yourself without having to brag about yourself, because you get to do it through telling the story of this organization that you worked for. The other thing is that if you provide the reader with a little bit of an intro about the organization, when you get to a phone call or get to a meeting, they're already going to know about your prior employers. So you don't have to waste time going back and talking about, well, where did you work and what do they do and who do they serve? That part's been taken care of. You've already provided that on the resume. So the conversation can focus on you and your accomplishments. Because again, they're hiring you. They're not hiring your prior organization. And so if you only have, sometimes interviews are really tight, 30, 45 minutes. So you really need to use every second of that to talk about you and the value you have generated in the past and the value that you will bring to this organization, not spending 5 or 10 minutes explaining what each organization you worked for does and why they matter. Photos. Again, photos do not belong on your resume. photos belong on LinkedIn, and we're going to talk about why photos are so important for LinkedIn in a second here. Mind the gaps. That's a little, for those of you who've been to the UK, right? Like you're getting onto the tube. Gaps in employment. So recruiters will go through your resume, and this is usually in the first meeting or first phone screen, and they'll ask you what we call RFL, reasons for leaving. Why did you move from each of your positions? And they're going to want to, obviously they're doing their homework to see if there's anything untoward in terms of your reasons for leaving each job. But the transition points and the pivots are important because it says a lot about you and what's going on in your career, right? So if you've got big gaps in your employment history, you better be prepared to explain the reason behind those gaps, because that's instantly going to throw up a red flag on the hiring manager's side, because they're going to make the assumption that, well, if this person is really good at what they do, why were they out of work for 6 to 12 months? If they're really good, they would have been snapped up immediately. And I would expect their resume to go from one org to another org to another org without big gaps in employment. So be prepared to answer questions about that and have very good constructive reasons for leaving each position. The good reasons would be you got headhunted to another role, you went back to school full time, maybe you had to care for small children for a while, maybe you were a trailing spouse and your spouse got promoted and so you moved to another part of the country. Those are all reasons, those are positive reasons, right? Those are things related to personal and professional development. And what I'm about to say next is more often at the VP and C level, but when we hear a candidate explain why they left the reason they left their last organization being that they had a difference of strategic opinion with the board, or they thought the organization should move in one direction and the board thought the organization should move in another direction. Instantly what the hiring manager is thinking is that's code for this person got pushed out. And so if that is the true reason that you left an organization because of a difference in opinion with regards to the strategic direction, you've got to be really ready to explain that and talk through it and calm those fears, because that's what's going to give the hiring manager jitters. If a candidate has 2 or 3 of those on their resume, right? So, one might be fine, but if they have left their last 3 positions, again, for differences of opinion with the CEO or strategic differences with their board, that's not a positive pattern. And so they are going to assume that this person is hard to work with and they've been pushed out of each of their roles. So be ready to explain your reasons for moving from each position. And if there is data to back it up, be able to provide that too. What were you doing during that time? Hopefully you're doing something that shows that you were continuing to move forward if you had a big gap in your resume. Big text blocks. When readers see big blocks of text, like big, long, chunky paragraphs, like 4 to 10 lines, they're going to start to tune out, right? You want to write a resume that's nicely laid out, but in small, nice, easily digestible little chunks and paragraphs and bullets. So make sure that you don't have big blocks of text. Like I said, the little intro line, the intro paragraph for each of your organizations should really only be 2, 3, maybe 4 lines at most. Because if a reader looks at a resume and there's huge paragraphs, it just looks really dense. It looks tedious. They're either going to set it aside because they're not going to want to read it. They're going to read the resumes that they can skim quickly first. Or if they do read it, you're going to lose your audience, right? Their brain's going to drift off. You're going to lose them, right? So keep it concise, keep it punchy, keep it impactful. Our recommended font is Calibri 11. It is fresh, contemporary. It's still very professional looking. Times New Roman looks too old school and dated. Arial takes up too much room and it's not quite as, I think, professional looking as Calibri. So that's the font and the size that we recommend for the body of your resume. Your name at the top, you might want to put that in like 16 or 18, so that sort of pops off the page visually. I'm going to take a pause here after references for a sec. References do not go on your resume. Please, please, please don't put that line at the bottom of the page that says references available upon request. We know that. If it gets to the reference checking stage, you will be asked to provide them at that time, but not before then. So save space on your resume, protect the private information of your referees, and only give that out when you are asked if you get deep enough into the hiring process. So let me take a quick pause, Jean, if there's any questions before I move into LinkedIn.
Yeah, we have a couple questions.
Okay.
One about, I guess, mind the gaps. Do you have any advice for people who may have been laid off as a result of the pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
Do you just say that you've been laid off because of that, or is there a different way to frame that message?
No, you can be open and honest with that one, because firstly, it's something everyone is aware of, right? There's not a single person in the country right now who's not aware of the dire economic circumstances. So it's well known that this trend is out there. Everyone knows it is affecting every organization, some more than others, but I can't think of a single organization that has not been impacted by the COVID shutdown. And so be open, be honest. And it's something that's happening to all of us. It's not something that happened just to you. And so that helps disarm any potential criticism that you may have been laid off due to your own performance. So, it is what it is. You get it out there, and it's easily understandable. And then you can just get on with the rest of the conversation. So you're not alone out there with that one.
Great. In terms of the format of your resume, the question is, the newer formats don't upload into an electronic application system as well as the older, simpler formats do. Do you recommend having two different formats for your resume?
No, you recommend having the clean, simple format. If your resume isn't uploading into most of the talent acquisition platforms out there, then your format probably needs to be reevaluated. If your resume is clean, simple, chronological, paragraph form with bullet points, and again, short paragraphs, you shouldn't have any trouble uploading it. So if you're having trouble, you probably have graphics or tables or graphs or photos or some kind of non-standard formatting in there that is causing you problems. If your resume is a Word file, it shouldn't have any problem uploading. PDFs shouldn't either, but Word is the easiest for any system to upload and parse. So you might want to take a look at that formatting.
Great. And then someone has asked, why do some jobs ask for references as part of the initial application process?
Yeah, that's a little weird. We don't. And in my opinion, when you're providing references, you're giving someone's personal information, right? So you want to be sure that the employer is serious about you before you provide that information. The other thing is, it means that that's just more data that they've got to hold on to, right? So from an HR perspective and a legality perspective, as the hiring organization, you really only want to request the bare minimum information from candidates that you need at that point in time. The more personal info you're collecting about people, it can become a liability. So I would say, providing references at stage one for an employer or requesting references is not advisable. If let's say it's a government institution and you have to go through their online portal and you can't advance to the next page unless you upload reference information, you got to do it. You got to play that game, right? Same thing with the cover letter. If the application process requires a cover letter, unfortunately, you're just going to have to write it. So if you're serious about the position and they're asking you for references up front, unfortunately, you're just going to have to do it. But be sure to reach out to your references and let them know in advance. Firstly, get their okay to use them as references, and let them know that you're applying for such and such a position, and the hiring process has requested references at the initial stage. So is it okay if you provide them as part of your application? Most of the time people will say yes, and it's not a problem. And usually that is by far not standard practice, just so you know. Providing references at stage 1 is not standard practice. We don't ask for references until we get deeper into the process and we know we are serious about this candidate. The other thing why it's not a smart move for employers is that if you are recruiting someone who is working at another organization, you want to protect their privacy, right? Because if you contact their references at, let's say, stage 1 of a 5-stage recruiting process, you've blown their cover, because now people know that they're looking for another job and you're not that serious about them on your end. So that's why we prefer to save references for later in the process, when we know this person is a really good fit and we know the client's very serious about them. Then we will start the reference checking process out of respect for the candidate, because we don't want to put them in a compromised position if, for instance, they're not selected for the position. If word got back to their current employer because someone did reference checks really early, that would be very damaging to them.
Great, thank you, Trevor. So a little bit of housekeeping. We're coming up against 1 o'clock, and we're still going to learn a little bit about LinkedIn profiles, but I have seen some requests come through for some samples, Trevor, of good resumes. So I wanted to just let everyone know that we will work with Trevor on that offline. And if we're able to provide that, they'll be on our resource page with the recording of today's webinar. And we are going to continue with the LinkedIn portion, and then we will definitely go over our 1 o'clock today with the presentation and then the opportunity to continue to ask questions. But for those of you that needed to leave at 1 o'clock today, I want to make sure that you know that if we're able to find some sample resumes to share, we will put those on both of our websites. So
Sure.
With that, Trevor, we're caught up with our questions.
Okay, well, 2 things. Let me make it real quick and easy. There are millions of resume guides out there. The one that we recommend is very short. It's about a 90-minute read. It costs $5 on Amazon. It is the Ladders 2020 Resume Guide, and it was written by Mark Centinella, the CEO of Ladders. It is the best guide out there that we have seen. It is what we recommend for our coaching clients to use. All the stuff that we've been talking about is embodied in that Ladders 2020 Resume Guide. It is clean, simple, easy to use, provides you with tons of templates. A few quick caveats though about the Ladders Guide, and this is where we really strongly disagree with the guide. Otherwise, everything in there is solid advice. You'll notice they use an outdated font. They're using Times New Roman, which doesn't look as good, so use Calibri 11. The guide also tells you not to bother to customize the resume for each position you're applying for. That's terrible advice. If the job is really important to you, take a few minutes to customize the resume for that organization, for that job. Again, it could be as simple as just making sure you're using the same terminology. Look on the website, look at the job description, make sure you're using the same language. That's really all customization is about. It doesn't have to take a ton of time, but make sure you customize. Number 3, the Ladders Guide says a resume should only be 1 to 2 pages. We already talked about why that's bad advice. So resume can be 3 or 4. Again, the longer you've been in your role, the more data you have to share, the longer your resume is going to be. It's going to be sent around in soft copy, so don't worry too much about the length. The other thing, the Ladders Resume Guide is definitely focused more on corporate resumes. So I think there's only one nonprofit, and it may not even be a nonprofit, it may be more of a mission-based organization versus a true nonprofit. But anyway, almost all the examples in the Ladders Guide are for corporate resumes. That's okay. The format is still the same. So you can still follow everything in there regardless of the sector that you're applying for. So those are sort of our the big caveats that we have with the guide. Otherwise, you can trust that it's pretty sound advice. You'll also notice that in the templates in the Ladders book that they're only one line. and you really want to flesh that out to 2 or 3. Give a little bit more information and background about the organization. Firstly, one line just looks really skimpy on the resume, but you can't really tell too much of the organization's story. Again, why are they a leader in what they do? Why do they matter? Who do they serve? Talk up the organization a little bit so that, you inadvertently get to talk up yourself too by doing that. So, yeah, Ladder's 2020 Resume Guide. It's available on Amazon. Highly, highly recommend it. Let's move on to LinkedIn. And then I can go later than 10 past, Janine. So if folks have additional questions, I'm happy to stick around a little bit longer and keep taking questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Trevor.
LinkedIn. And here's why it's only one slide of this 7-slide deck. LinkedIn is really based off your resume. And so you need to have your resume done before you can write an effective LinkedIn profile. And I'm going to go really, really fast here, but get a good resume dialed in, and then you copy paste your resume into LinkedIn versus the other way around. So that's why we spend all the time talking about the resume, because that's going to create the content that you can use for LinkedIn. We post on dozens of different job boards every year, and that's just to make sure we're covering all the bases in case there's a really niche job board that pertains to our client's sector. But I can tell you that the vast, vast, vast majority of candidates we are finding through LinkedIn. It's not through Indeed. It's not through Career Builder or any of those other sites. Indeed is truly the best place to go for the best opportunities because it is the most effective from the recruiter's perspective for a few reasons. Number one, it takes a while to set up a good LinkedIn profile. So that means that really diligent, serious candidates are the ones that are going to invest that time to get on LinkedIn and to set up a good profile. Secondly, LinkedIn has really good functionality, both for the candidate in terms of networking and searching out opportunities, and for the employer in terms of headhunting. The other thing is that LinkedIn has a photo. And we don't care what you look like, but we really, really care that you know how to take a professional photo. And so that photo, from the recruiter's perspective, saves us a lot of time, because if the photo is unprofessional, it tells us a lot about that candidate, that they don't know, they are not savvy enough to market and brand themselves very well. So how can I trust that if they can't represent themselves very well, I can't trust that they're going to represent my client very well or represent our firm very well as a candidate. So really spend the time to get a good LinkedIn photo. It is worth investing the $50 to $100 to get a professional photographer to take a professional LinkedIn photo. I cannot emphasize that enough. You don't want to have a great resume and then a really unprofessional LinkedIn photo. Your Facebook photo is totally different. Your LinkedIn photo needs to be pretty buttoned down and corporate. You don't necessarily have to be wearing a suit, but for gentlemen, you want to wear a button-down shirt and maybe a jacket at a minimum, right? Be aware of what the background is as well. Don't take a LinkedIn photo in front of a plain white wall because it'll look like a passport photo and nobody looks good in that situation. So you want something that's kind of an interesting background, but a background that is not going to distract the viewer from looking at you. The other reason why recruiters really like LinkedIn is because if we're going to meet this person, it's nice to have a visual on who's going to be coming in to meet with us, or if we're meeting a client or a candidate over coffee or something, it's really helpful to have an idea of who you're looking for when you walk in. It also just makes people feel like they already know you before they meet you as a candidate. So candidates who have LinkedIn photos are taken more seriously and statistically have much better results through the application process. So get a good photo taken and upload it on the website because it will give you an edge in the process. The photo is just you, by the way. It is not you plus someone. Don't crop a photo where we can see someone else's shoulder or anything like that. Candidates really can do themselves a lot of damage by not having a professional LinkedIn photo. Connections, they do matter. So get on LinkedIn if you're not on there and use it. Connect with people, especially if you are in any kind of an externally facing role. Whoever's looking at your profile is going to expect that you have a decent number of connections, right? If I'm a fundraiser and I only have like 4 connections on LinkedIn, that says either I'm not that good of a fundraiser or I'm not that tech savvy if I'm not able to leverage technology to connect with people, right? So if you're in a role that is relationship driven, people are going to expect that you have a decent number of LinkedIn connections. It doesn't have to be in the thousands, but it needs to be more than just 10 or 15, right? So set up a good profile and use it to connect with people. Endorsements, they're nice, but they're not really necessary. We don't spend too much time looking at the endorsements section of LinkedIn. If the photo is good and the resume is good, and there's the work history is compelling, that's going to be enough to move them forward. We're probably not even going to get into the endorsements or what they've been posting farther down on the page. But again, they're nice to have, especially if there are influential people in your sector who would say nice things about you. Feel free to go ahead and get some endorsements on there too. And lastly, you will start to get hit up by people on LinkedIn to connect. As you have more connections, you'll get hit up for more connections. I wouldn't stress too much about, oh, should I connect with this person or not? If they're, firstly, if the photo looks professional, they don't look creepy. But secondly, if there is some logical connection between the two of you or connection to your industry, even if you don't know them, go ahead and accept. I have never, in all the years I've had a LinkedIn profile, and I accept 90% of the LinkedIn requests that come my way, I have never had anything untoward happen because of a LinkedIn connection that I accepted from someone that I didn't actually know personally. So again, it's about building a big, broad online network, but it's not your personal network, right? So it's okay to have people in your network that you've never actually talked to before. You never know when those connections might deliver some value. So with that, I'm going to leave my contact info here. I'm happy to take other questions. The other thing I will share, Janine, is that we host a monthly career transition seminar here at our office. Obviously, they have not been occurring at our office over the past couple of months, unfortunately. We love to meet people in person whenever we can. But what we do is we have a 2-hour open house. Normally, we're sitting around the conference table, and it is an opportunity for us to share with candidates how the search process works. We talk about a lot of the stuff we covered in today's presentation, but it is to help candidates understand the recruiting process so they can better position themselves for every stage of the way. We get a lot of folks who have been coming in number 2, number 3 in search processes, and they're missing something that is preventing them from actually getting the offer in the end. And those are the sorts of things that we talk about, as well as basic career strategies, networking. We leave a lot of Q&A time for a roundtable discussion as well. So my contact info is there. We host them every month. Our next one is actually coming up on June 3rd, I think it is. But if you can't make the June one, we do, like I said, we do it every month. And as soon as we get the all clear, we look forward to moving those back into our office and doing them in person. So if this presentation touched on some of the stuff that you think you really want to dig deeper in, please feel free to join us for one of our seminars coming up. And with that, I'm happy to take more Q&A.
So Trevor, the open houses that you talked about, is the calendar on your website, or how would people find the schedule?
Thank you. Good question. It's by invitation only. And that's because we used to do them in person, and our conference room could only hold 15 people. So it was invite only to make sure that we didn't overbook. We may very well, actually we're in the process of relaunching our website, so we may put that information up on our website. But right now, the way to get an invite and to stay on the list for the following months is just to drop me an email or reach out to my colleague Diana or reach out to my colleague Sarah, any one of us, and we'll make sure that you get on the list.
Okay, perfect. Let's see. We have a question about first in-person interviews, and if it's still a good idea to bring hard copies of your resumes to that interview.
Yes, absolutely. What you want to bring to your interview is a pad folio, right? The leather binder that opens up, and inside you want to make sure you have pen, paper, and a few hard copies of your resume. And that way, then you can also stick business cards or any documents that the other person might share with you in there as well. It's also handy to have a copy of the position description on hand, just so you can kind of do a little bit of last minute cramming before you walk in the door of your meeting. But definitely make sure you take something to write with to every professional meeting and interview at every stage of the way. You never want to walk into an interview and be all nice and suited up and then just sit down and you have nothing in front of you, right? Because you look totally naked on the other side of the table. You want to show up prepared. Also, showing up with a padfolio is a sign of respect to the person that you're meeting with, because when you clearly have something to take notes with and are taking notes, it tells the person, this is even more important with informational interviews, it communicates to them that you're taking this meeting seriously, that you're organized, that you're prepared, that you value your time together, and that you're certain that what they are about to share with you over the next hour or half hour, however much time you have together, is going to be really impactful, and it's going to be information that you want to capture. The other thing is, if you're meeting with someone and they're throwing out names, phone numbers, emails, all sorts of data points, you want to be able to capture that. There's no way you can just sit there, and I don't care how amazing of a memory someone has, there's no way you could record in your brain an hour-long conversation and capture all those details. The other thing is, it makes people uncomfortable if you go to coffee for an informational interview and you set your phone down and say, would you mind if I record this conversation? Even if they say yes, you're going to get a lot less meaningful of a connection out of that person, right? Because then it feels like they're giving a deposition. So bring pen and paper, bring hard copy resume. You never know when the person might ask to see it. They may have forgotten to bring a copy. It's a nice leave behind as well. So yes.
Great. Well, that wraps up all the questions that we have. Want to confirm, Trevor, that the next open house that you have on June 3rd is a virtual convening.
Yes, it'll be on Zoom.
And so is there still space and opportunity for people to participate in that?
Yes, we had 26 people in the seminar last month. So yeah, capacity, it can hold as many folks as would like to attend. Or again, you're welcome to attend the July one. We do it every month.
Okay. So there we go. Thank you so much, Trevor. I learned a lot. And I'm always so grateful. And I know that Laura joins me in appreciation for you taking the time. This is a unique time, an unprecedented time, not only for the world, but for our sector. And as Laura talked about earlier, you know, this is the first time we've seen nonprofit unemployment going down. And so this was a really important discussion, and I know that you've helped an awful lot of people in giving insight so that they can be successful in finding their next opportunity so that they can continue to lift up the sector and contribute to our community. So we are very grateful for your time and your expertise. Thank you to all of you who have joined us today. As a reminder, this recording will be on both of our websites later today or by Monday, and we will list some resources. We did put the Ladders Guide in there, and you have Trevor's email, so if you're interested in the open houses, you can connect directly with Trevor. So with that, I will remind you we have 2 more webinars coming up next week. We're doing Dare to Lead, which is the Brene Brown training. It's a 2-part training, and so that information is on our webpage if you're interested in that. Laura, did you have anything that you wanted to add before we wrapped up?
Just my thanks to Trevor and the team at Blair, and that I wish everyone else on this call well, and that just kind of thank you for being on the front lines.
Thanks, everyone, and enjoy your weekend.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.